sole proprietorships, joint ventures, franchises, general partnerships, limited liability corporations, limited liability partnerships, limited liability limited partnerships, close corporations, C corporations, Class S corporations, domestic corporations, benefit corporations, and there are many, many more. That's a huge mouthful. The formation of businesses is at the heart of so much of what business law obviously is about. It's a huge topic in any business law class, and it often leaves people, I think, lost. So I like to bring it down to earth a little bit with some motifs that we can all understand. Often, if we tie it into competition, people can understand better because they think of things like sports. Or to put it in a more drastic, violent manner, let's say sports writ large, warfare. So let me give you 3 examples in chronological order. In the 700s, Spain was racked with violence. Across the waterway, across from the Straits of Gibraltar in Morocco, were a people steeled in warfare. The Berbers of Morocco, who had in effect combined with the Arabs and taken over all of North Africa in a generation. Some of the warring tribes in Spain looked to the Berbers and said, maybe they can help us. And they invited them over. And these people came over, helped out in the little warfare, the little civil war going on there in Spain, and decided they liked it there in Spain, that maybe they wouldn't just be a temporary resident of Spain, but they'd stay. And they stayed for almost 800 years. That is a classic example, if you will, of the white knight, the person who is allied with a group in a corporation, and for short-term interests, these alliances may be very satisfactory, but in terms of the long term, sometimes they don't work out so well. Sometimes when you pick a white knight, you have to choose between the lesser, you hope, of 2 evils. You may pick someone who takes over, in fact, your corporation. That's a question of alliances or interests. Now, another example that we could tie into corporate law more directly would be the great nation state of the Netherlands. You may not think of the Netherlands as being a world power, but in the late 1600s, early 1700s, it was for a while a rival of England. It was a world power. And I'm holding one of the nicest little wooden tulip bulbs you could ever find. Have any of you heard of the tulip bulb scandal? The whole scandal emanated from markets which suddenly started valuing single tulip bulbs to the net worth of tens of thousands of dollars apiece. The scandal finally broke in terms of someone finally saying, I'm not going to pay that much for a tulip bulb. The prices plummeted. Vast fortunes which had been made were now lost. People were unemployed. People looked to the corporations which were behind a lot of these sales and transactions and said, there's something wrong with corporate law. They said, is it really right to have control of a corporation distinct from ownership? Is it really right to have owners who might at least indirectly be profiting from what a corporation is doing, not be held completely accountable for the harm that emanates from that corporation? And then the last example is, no, not the mighty state of Delaware. We will talk about that in class. So I brought along my Fighting Blue Hen mascot hat and an actual stuffed, perhaps, blue hen. But the great nation of Russia, Mother Russia. Now, what happened in Russia in the summer of 1941. An invasion. Germany invaded. Hitler double-crossed Stalin. Two of the worst people in all history, and one, imagine that, double-crossed the other. What did the Russians do? They didn't have any really good generals at the time. Most of them had been purged by Stalin. They didn't have many armaments. What they had was land and lots of troops. So what they did was give up a lot of troops, sadly, and they retreated. And as they retreated, they burned. They burned, baby burned. They burned as much of Mother Russia and the Ukraine and elsewhere as they could. Now, it worked. In the end, the tide was turned. The Soviets defeated the Germans on the eastern side. America and the rest invaded in the west, and Hitler was defeated. If this were in a corporate setting, this happens frequently, and yet it is challenged. Why is it challenged? Just because there are tactics that work, say for management, not literally burning down your corporation, but opting for approaches which make your business less attractive to takeovers, does not necessarily make it acceptable in corporate law. So we're going to talk about that as well. We're going to talk about alliances and interests. We're going to talk about control versus ownership. We're going to talk about strategy and tactics. As our 30th president once famously said, the business of America is business. Now, what the heck is that? He was actually elected. People in the 20s actually thought that was a profound statement. That may not be a profound statement, but for law, there really are standards. Even if the business of America as business is just some sort of strange statement which doesn't really stand for anything, there are in fact business standards in the law. We won't let people get away with a short saying which can't be put to the task to see what does this mean. For instance, Calvin Coolidge may have gotten away with statements like that. I mean, after all, he's the one who famously was challenged by a lady at a party who said, "Why, Mr. President, I have a bet here with some of the other women at the party that I can get you to say more than 2 words." And with that, he looked her in the eye, said, "You lose," and departed. So you might be able to get away with that in other areas. But in law, particularly when we're talking about business standards, corporations, other formations, what we talk about here are standards which will be evaluated by courts, by legislatures, by commentators, by professors and students. We will look at who are the constituents, who are the stakeholders in these business, and we are looking towards standards that we hope will help us to avoid some, perhaps, of the enormous disasters which I have just alluded to, whether they are scandals or economic depression or even, who knows, perhaps war. До свидания.